Hi, my name is Mark Crawley and welcome to Diversity Connect. Today we're going to look at the recent update for the Autism Act. So the Autism Act from 2009 has gone through a significant review over the past year or so. And while the final sort of recommendations have not been sort of fully formalised, there are a series of sort of insights as to the type of things that are going to be recommended for when the actual Autism Act or the updated version is released in July next year, right? So yeah, it's quite a significant moment because as you can imagine, from 2009, a lot of things have changed and there's been a lot of updates and there's been a couple of interim updates, etc. But this is the most significant review of this act. So we're going to go through it a little bit more detail now. So first of all, what is it? It was introduced in 2009 and the government was required to develop a strategy to address inequalities autistic individuals face. And this was quite groundbreaking at the time. It was the first disability-specific legislation in England. It mandated national recognition and looking at the actual needs of autistic adults. And it hopefully was starting to lead to better awareness and wider access to services like diagnosis. So I think you look at my son, for example, he was born in 2007 and he got his diagnosis in 2010, I believe, maybe 11. But of course, at that time, there was a process in place, and it was very, very smooth for us, certainly because of his age, etc. So you can see, I suppose, that there was some things in place then, but there's no doubt a lot of things have changed, obviously, since then, right? So why is it being reviewed, right? So the Autism Act itself, and obviously you can have a look at it online and you can see what it looked like from its original draft. The first thing is diagnosis waiting times, right? They are excessive at the moment. They really are, and sometimes into years, particularly for adults. There's a massive employment gap still. I mean, you can see sort of a few statistics there. There's various stats. There's 71% of autistic adults unemployed. 3 in 10 autistic adults are in employment, which is not too dissimilar. So, but then you can see compared to 8 in 10 non-disabled people, that this is a significant challenge. It really, really is. And it's one of the main reasons we started Diversity in the first place, right? To try and contribute to helping more autistic and neurodivergent individuals get back into work. Because of the lack of support and lack of access to diagnosis and employment, obviously, as you can imagine, there is a perceived mental health crisis, right? And I can see why that would be the case. People cannot receive support. There's a failure to provide early, preventative, and low community and any type of community support. There's just not a lot out there on a consistent basis. And then, obviously, very, very concerning, health and mortality. Autistic people on average face significantly shorter life expectancies due to health inequalities. Obviously, things like mental health challenges, lack of employment, all contribute, I'm sure, to that as well. So these are the main reasons. There's a variety of other reasons, I'm sure, right? But these are the main reasons that it was being reviewed. So essentially, a committee has come together, looked at the act and think, okay, what are the main areas that need to be updated, right? So what are the key updates? So these, of course, just to let you know, are not actually formalised as yet, but these are the things that are coming when the report becomes essentially legislation in July next year. So the first one is to launch an initiative to improve understanding and acceptance of autism and expand mandatory training on autism for public-facing staff. So you imagine someone who's working in customer service at an airport or a train station or in a retailer. It could be interesting there that those type of sessions will be mandatory and they're produced with autistic individuals and those who support them, right? So very much, if you look at something like the Oliver McGowan training, the idea there is delivered alongside autistic individuals or those with lived experience to make sure that there's an authenticity to it and that voice is being heard in that training. So very, very interesting there, because obviously that is quite wide reaching and a big significant step in driving, I suppose, awareness in particular to organisations and public services, etc. Also, there's going to be some investment in driving down autism assessment waiting times, while also developing and scaling effective models for identification, assessment, and lifelong step support. So, again, the waiting lists there are a consistent challenge, but also looking at, okay, once you've had a diagnosis, right, what does that support look like going forward? A couple of other areas are to give services backing and incentives to provide low-level integrated support to autistic people to prevent care needs from developing and escalating into crisis. So looking at local authority support, like obviously social housing and any type of support that individuals will get, trying to give a little bit more assistance there and a bit more understanding. Setting a clear timeline and roadmap for strong community services to be put in place, so the provisions in the mental health bill to end the unnecessary detention of autistic people and people with a learning disability can be commenced. Right. So again, this roadmap to have these community services, and so people obviously understand a lot more around autism and the traits associated with autism, will hopefully contribute to obviously stopping certainly things like unnecessary detention of autistic individuals, and making sure that people are understood and not misinterpreted, etc. I think that's quite a key update, actually, from what I see on a day-to-day basis. Something else is enabling local authorities and NHS bodies to provide services for young autistic people during the crucial transition to adulthood, bringing together with education, employment, housing, and mental health. So this is quite interesting because I do a little bit of work, or did a little bit of work as an enterprise advisor for an organisation that had the contract essentially to help support career transitions and try to make sure that schools were living up to things called the Gatsby benchmarks, which gives consistent advice to young people when they're leaving school. And you say it's consistent, it's very inconsistent, right? And I think the implementation of these type of processes are just not at a moment, I don't think, are quite fit for purpose. So, for example, if you're an autistic school leaver, what type of advice are you getting, right? What type of advice are you getting from the careers teachers at your school and then in college, and what type of support are you getting from that point onwards, and all of these crucial transitions, right? And of course, not just in education, but housing and all of these other areas. What does that look like on a consistent basis? And there's a few things I can see already starting to help, like Connect to Work and a bit of an investment in trying to tailor career advice and any transition services. But ultimately, this is obviously a key area. Building up capability for educating autistic children and young people across all types of educational provisions, supporting high performance specialist schools to act as centres of excellence. So again, I think this is important. My son was in a SEND provision within a mainstream school when he was at primary school and infants, and then he went to a dedicated school, predominantly for autism, at secondary level. So when you're looking at all of this, I would suggest that there is very much a low expectation in a lot of these provisions in terms of the educational capabilities of a lot of autistic individuals. And I think that if you can build up that provision and make sure that people are challenged in the right way, get the support they need, but obviously come out of school and come out of those areas having fulfilled their potential and being supported through their potential. And I think this is quite an important point, because you don't get to 71% of autistic adults being unemployed by accident, right? You don't get to that point. There's various factors like recruitment processes and wider support and understanding within society. But I would suggest that those educational pathways, again, are a key point. So quite a key update, I would suggest there as well. So another, the final two recommendations are to provide employers with better support and incentives to enable more autistic people to find, stay and thrive in work. So I mentioned Connect to Work, and we've got another webinar on this, which is quite interesting. But it's making sure that employers do have access to resources, training, understanding, some coaches, etc., to help autistic people get into work. If you look at something like the Buckland report, this it focuses on this quite a lot back in 2024, and trying to make sure that autistic individuals are given the opportunity to thrive, not just survive at work, which is important. And I think this type of recommendation will start to impact a variety of other of these recommendations. For example, you'd imagine it will help with some of the mental health challenges, right? It will help with things like mortality. It will help, obviously, people try to get into housing. All of these other areas, it can stem from the employer and being employed in a role where you feel supported. And the final one is develop, test and roll out effective ways to identify and support autistic people involved in the criminal justice systems as victims, witnesses or offenders. So I don't pretend to be an expert in the criminal justice system, but I do know that there are a very, very high percentage of neurodivergent individuals within that. So if there's ways to make sure that people are supported within this system, so again, there's not misunderstandings, people get given continued support, and maybe in terms of rehabilitation and reintegration, that people are getting that level of support, so that there's not that cycle of misunderstandings and lack of support going forward. That could be really interesting. So again, I think that's quite a key point. So you can see here that there's a variety of touch points here, really, where you can see they're trying to cover a sort of a range of these areas that are potentially causing challenges for the autistic community. So on the whole, I quite like what I've seen here so far. But it's like anything, right? We had the Buckland report in 2024. Has it really made an impact? Probably not. It's almost going to be superseded soon by something from Stephen Timms, etc. And then obviously we have this update for the Autism Act. Obviously, we mustn't forget that there are a lot of other neurotypes as well that aren't being supported. There's co-occurrence. There's a lot of other things, right? So there's a lot of challenges to try and navigate here. But in terms of trying to provide support, better understanding, better pathways, better job opportunities, better educational support, better diagnosis for the autism community, this looks like it could be quite an interesting step, right? So again, summer of next year, when this report, when all of the recommendations go fully live, it'd be good to see at that point what happens from that point onwards. Okay, so the final part is, I've just realised my photo's blocked a little bit here, so apologies. But Baroness Rock, who was the chair of this committee, made a point of saying that they're definitely indebted to all of the contributors, nearly 400 written submissions, which is a record number for a House of Lords Select Committee. Obviously, really, those journeys really help shape some of the recommendations here. So it draws on that evidence, draws on that data, draws on what's out there, and draws obviously on the journeys of the autistic community. And now, of course, the government must use these findings to fulfill its commitment, right? And make sure that people get the right level of support they need. So July 2026 is quite an interesting date to put into the diary. So again, what we'll do is we'll add a link when we put the webinar on to the full transcript of all of this, these recommendations, and you can see what you think. But we'd love your thoughts. We really, really would. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the Autism Act 2009 update. We'll do probably other webinar when it goes fully live. But of course, we'll add this to the webinar collection. Let us know your thoughts on these findings and recommendations so far. And of course, you can DM us if you need to. Yeah, it's an interesting time, 2026, I think, for moving things forward. We hope things don't go backwards. Obviously, from a geopolitical landscape, it can sometimes be a little bit uncertain, and particularly you look at something like the direction that Reform, for example, would like to go in. It sounds like ED&I would be very, very low down on their pecking order, etc. But at the same time, I think if organisations can start to look at these recommendations and politicians can look at these recommendations in a way of saying, okay, here's a great opportunity to try and get more people into work, then a lot of the other problems will I wouldn't say will be solved, but they will impact solutions, I would suggest. So yeah, be interesting to see this, particularly for our job seekers and how this develops. But of course, thank you so much for watching for today, and we look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Thanks very much. Bye.
Thank you for watching. Make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And scan the QR code to join the Diversa Connect community.